Well, I'm pleased to welcome you all to this morning's last lecture, part of our ongoing offerings during Sacred Hour. And this morning, it's my pleasure to introduce our colleague, Laura Neary, who serves both as the director of the Writing Center and an adjunct assistant professor of English here at St. Norbert. Laura's commitment to our college community is deep and decades long. She's been committed to serving our students and supporting the needs of the college with both flexibility and dedication. Her attentiveness, compassion, and willingness to go the extra mile to support someone who needed an extra bit of kindness was especially evident to me just in the last couple of weeks. A story I won't detail, but I deeply appreciate the way that Laura puts into action her care for her colleagues and this wider community. So because she is such a valued colleague and a person whose example both inspires and challenges me, I am pleased to introduce to you this morning, Laura Neary.
Thank you, Julie. Doesn't she do a great job? Those of you who have been to these last lectures before hear her wonderful, generous introductions, which is why when I got the email from Julie asking me if I would do a last lecture, I thought, oh my God. Of course, I will say yes to anything she will ask me, but I was horrified at the same time because I thought, what am I going to talk about? I got nothing. So I let it rattle around in my brain for a few days after I'd said yes, thinking, can't turn back. And I kept coming back to this one concept that I realized has been pretty important to me the last few years, 3, 4, 5 years. And so I thought, okay, that concept is going to be my theme. And so I began to work on my last lecture. And as I started to write it, it occurred to me that, oh my God, maybe somebody else has already delivered a last lecture on this theme. And I've been to quite a few last lectures, but not all of them. So I went to the campus ministry archives site and I started noodling around and discovered, oops, there have been others who have talked on this theme, but not quite the way I was going to, and I'm putting a different spin on it than they did. So with a nod to Debbie Foss and Gary Umhafer, and I'm sure others who have talked about this too, the theme for my talk is gratitude. Of course, lots of important people have had much to say on the subject of gratitude. And I have some quotes here from these wonderful people. From author, poet, actor Maya Angelou, "Let gratitude be the pillow on which you kneel to say your nightly prayer." From author and editor Henry Van Dyke, "Gratitude is the inward feeling of kindness received." From activist and Pulitzer Prize-winning novelist Alice Walker, "Thank you is the best prayer that anyone could say." And from Greek fabulist Aesop, "Gratitude is the sign of noble souls." From poet, essayist Ralph Waldo Emerson, "Cultivate the habit of being grateful for every good thing that comes to you, and to give thanks continuously. And because all things have contributed to your advancement, you should include all things in your gratitude." Where am I here? From author and Trappist monk Thomas Merton, "To be grateful is to recognize the love of God in everything he has given us, and he has given us everything." And from Roman philosopher Cicero, "A thankful heart is not only the greatest virtue, but the parent of all other virtues." So I don't pretend to compare myself and my understanding of gratitude with that of the folks I've just mentioned, but I would like to talk in this last lecture about, for me, how gratitude is a sort of umbrella under which the things I feel are most important in my life, family, friends, community, kindness, love, and passion, find additional significance. Robert Emmons, a professor of psychology at UC Davis and kind of a big name in the study of gratitude, argues that gratitude has two key components, which he describes in one of his essays entitled, Why Gratitude is Good. First, he writes, gratitude is an affirmation of goodness. We affirm that there are good things in the world, gifts and benefits we received. Second, he explains we recognize that the sources of this goodness are outside of ourselves. We acknowledge that other people, or even higher powers, if you're of a spiritual mindset, gave us many gifts, big and small, to help us achieve the goodness in our lives. Again, the sources of goodness are outside of ourselves. This is important because, as Emmons says, it requires us to see how we've been supported and affirmed by other people. Something I feel is most important in my life is family. There have perhaps been no other people more supportive and affirming in my life than my family. I know I come from a family of privilege. My parents were well educated and their marriage was functional and intact, and we had the means to live in a safe neighborhood. Good community, good schools were readily available to me. And I always understood that I would go to college and that I could be anything I wanted to be when I grew up. Although, if you asked me when I was really young what I wanted to be when I grew up, I said I wanted to be a horse. But we'll come back to that. I had and I have an older brother who is kind and brave and strong and funny and who used to be a total pain in the butt and every once in a while still is. I was the recipient of goodness and benefits and privilege when I was growing up, and the sources were outside of myself. I was supported and affirmed by my family and by the community that we lived in. My community included good friends, and friends are another aspect of life I find really important. When we are lucky enough to have long-time friends, we understand that they can be a sort of mirror for us as time passes, reflecting who we were and who we want to be, and helping us adjust our course if necessary, if we get off track. Here I am, about 16. I'm the one on the left with my friend Cheryl, too young and inexperienced to appreciate the significance of the 40-year friendship that would follow. And here we are, all grown up. We were trying to imitate the same photo that we took however many years ago. Here I am with my friend Lisa. When we were maybe 18, we were into backpacking and we would hike the Sierras together and get into all sorts of adventures. And, again, all grown up, my friend Lisa and Cheryl and Roberta. We call ourselves now the Down the Chimney Gang because in middle school when we were young and bored, one day we decided to see if we could put one of us down Roberta's chimney. We were moderately successful. These friendships are gifts I have received. Good friendships are mile markers by which we measure our lives, and they are pure affirmations of goodness, the first component of gratitude. Then I married the most wonderful man on the planet, who's right back there. And together we raised 2 sons, but not without the help of our dear friends whom we consider family, and the help of our neighbors and the help of the St. Norbert community. There are no words to express the gratitude we feel toward our community and friends who have held us up during some pretty rough times. As some of you know, my husband, John, has Crohn's disease, which is an autoimmune disease that ravages the gastrointestinal tract, as do both our sons. A few years ago, in a preemptive move to avoid inevitable colon cancer, John had to have his colon removed, a difficult and potentially life-altering surgery. So first we threw a farewell to John's colon party. That's the official party t-shirt. And then John plunged into the surgery. Afterwards, we found ourselves in tears a lot, but the cause we realized was always gratitude. Friends who are also colleagues, who are in this room right now, traveled 5 hours to the hospital to visit John. Others called at times when they must have intuitively known we could use a little boost. Friends and members of the St. Norbert community, and really who can tell the difference, brought food and flowers and laughter and wisdom. How can one express gratitude for gifts like that? What can you say? How is thank you enough? Other parts of the community for which I suspect we are all grateful are the people here at St. Norbert College, the students, the faculty, the staff. I personally have been lucky enough over my years here to have worked with literally, I did the math, thousands of students, and they have taught me as well, and they have enriched my life in ways I cannot possibly express. Neighbors, too, can be an external source of goodness in our lives. John and I are not known for our handiness. This is John's butt. Our kids took this picture because they thought it was hilarious that John is often in that pose trying to fix something. It's a common scene at our house. If it's broken, though, at our house, it's going to require a professional to fix it, or our neighbor. I can't count the number of times one of us has gone next door to borrow a tool from our neighbor Mike and returned with the tool and with Mike. Mike seems to have a sort of sixth sense about our incompetence and when exactly he should step in before we hurt ourselves. At our house, Mike has laid bathroom tile, he has replaced doors, he has built furniture, repaired our bed, caught stray birds in our basement. We still don't know how the birds got in the basement. And he and his wife, another dear friend, have tended our children and cared for our neurotic dog. And I do not use that term neurotic lightly. This dog, and some of you have met this dog who no longer is alive, but this dog was crazy in ways that professionals would stagger to comprehend. Our gratitude to our neighbors, though, is immeasurable, as is their kindness. Kindness, another critical aspect of life. Acts of kindness are gifts, are benefits we receive, affirmations of goodness, components of gratitude. I'm sure if we all think back on our lives, on our day so far, or even in the last hour or so, we will recall acts of kindness done for us by others. These acts can be small, picking up a pencil that somebody dropped and handing it back to them, saving us a seat in this theater, or monumental, but they're gifts. And when we take the time to consider that even the smallest of these gifts, we realize that, considered from the proper perspective, much, dare I say most, of our lives, of our experience, has been a gift. So as I search back through my memory for some of the more unusual gifts of kindness I've received, affirmations of goodness, I recalled 4 that I thought I'd share with you, partly because of their utter unexpectedness. The first happened right after John and I were married. For our honeymoon, we went to Ontario, Canada, to their annual Stratford Shakespeare Festival, which I know, a couple of English majors, Shakespeare, how cliche. But one of the first nights there, we got disoriented from on our way back from the play venue, and we stopped at a gas station, and John was pumping the gas and somehow lost track of the amount, and he overfilled the tank, and it spit back at him and got all over his shirt and his pants and his shoes, which, as you know, if that's ever happened to you, just really stinks. And so it was very dark. John was very crabby. This was our honeymoon. There was no GPS system in those days, and so we didn't know how to get back to our hotel. So we asked directions from a gentleman who was filling up his car, and he answered us. And we knew he was speaking English, but we had no idea what he was saying, because he was speaking in that sort of snooty British accent that sounds like, and that's what we got. And we asked him to repeat, again, please, and I think we asked him once more, at which point we just thought, this could have been hilarious if we'd been in the right moods, but we weren't, and it wasn't. Fortunately, this fine gentleman must have decided that we were a couple of absolute fools who had no business being on the road, And so through additional gestures and noises that we couldn't comprehend, he made it clear to us that he would lead us to our destination in his car with ours following. And he did, thank God. And when we got there, he drove off without another word, which is fine because we wouldn't have known what he was saying anyway. But what an entirely selfless act of kindness. What a gift. What an affirmation of goodness. Another unexpected gift of kindness occurred one Christmas season. John and I had been to a costume party where we were required to wear Renaissance attire. I had on some long brocade type dress, and John was in tights with some puffy little pantaloons and a flashy dress. And someone else in this room was also dressed accordingly. In typical Wisconsin style, it had been ice raining most of the evening, and by the time we got to the car to drive home, the roads were treacherous. Fortunately, we didn't have too far to go. When we got most of the way home before, when we made a turn, the car decided not to, and it went into a snowbank from which we could not extricate ourselves. So I stayed with the car while John got out and gingerly made his way home. I watched his tights and pantaloons disappear into the darkness. So I hadn't been sitting in the car for too long before I heard the sound of a truck, and this truck pulled up, and they probably had four-wheel drive, 4 teenage boys hopped out, and they indicated to me that I should get out of the car, which I did, my fancy dress. And with very little effort, they picked up the part of the car that was in the snowbank, and we couldn't afford expensive cars, it was a little, and they set it back down on the road, and they got back in their car without much of anything to say, and they took off. When John returned in his pantaloons with his shovel, we were already good to go. But what a nice thing to do. I did not see that coming. Another unexpected gift of kindness pulled from my memory occurred at the home of Frank and Agnes Wood. Frank taught at St. Norbert College for many years, and Agnes belonged to a small musical group that occasionally held recitals, and John and I were invited to one. So we arrived at Frank and Agnes's home and rang the bell. Frank opened the door, and he was wearing a tie. Furthermore, we could see behind Frank and into the room that every other man there was wearing a tie. John was not wearing a tie. And John immediately expressed his embarrassment and apologized. And Frank said, "Oh, you don't need a tie." Immediately took his off, threw it aside, and ushered us into the room. Such a simple gesture, but it saved John's dignity. It probably made them both a lot more comfortable physically. Such a tiny kindness, really, but such a big gift for the recipient. My last example, although there are millions more, of an unexpected act of kindness, a gift of goodness, occurred last year when I was flying home from Portland, Oregon. My flight was delayed. So as I watched the clock tick in the airport, I realized if I ever got out of Portland, I was certainly going to miss my connection in Chicago. And my flight from Chicago to Green Bay was the last one of the night. So by phone, I reserved a car in Chicago so that when I got to Chicago, I could at least drive home. And as disgruntled passengers do, several of us sitting at the gate in Portland struck up a conversation. I mentioned to a couple of other women that I had reserved a car and that I was going to drive from Chicago home. Well, they were also missing a connection, and they were trying to get to Milwaukee, and they seemed pretty anxious to get home. So I said, well, you're welcome to ride along with me. I can drop you in Milwaukee. And they offered to split the cost of the rental car. So, okay, we had a plan. So, unfortunately, we didn't get to Chicago until 11 o'clock at night, which meant we were going to get to Milwaukee at 1 o'clock in the morning, and I was going to get to Green Bay at 3. So I got off the plane in Chicago, met up with the two women again who were sitting further ahead of me in the plane, and they immediately announced that they weren't comfortable with my driving all the way to Green Bay from Milwaukee by myself in the early hours of the morning in a thunderstorm, because of course it was storming, and they felt I should come home with one of them, spend the night, and start out for Green Bay in the morning. Now, my mother had always taught me not to talk to strangers. Certainly not to go home with them. Spend the night with them alone. But my gut instinct was that these two were okay, and I knew that they were both widows, and they didn't live together. It was just going to be one of them I was going to be going home with. And as I sized them up, I realized I could probably outrun them. And I could probably take them in a fight if I had to. They were like 70. So I went. I spent the night in a sweetly appointed little bedroom at Betty's or Mary's or Edna's, I don't remember her name. Got up the next morning, left a note of thanks, and drove on home to Green Bay, and we exchanged emails later in the day. What a totally unexpected gesture of kindness these two women were showing me, especially since they didn't know me any more than I knew them. I could have murdered Betty in her bed and stolen her silver and then run. But her kindness and her faith in people overrode that concern, and she gave me the gift of a warm, clean bed and a night of rest. I was grateful, not just for that, but for her certainty that I was a good person. Other gifts and benefits we receive come from all sorts of experiences we undergo. How about falling in love? What an incredible experience, no matter how it turns out. And if we haven't fallen in love, we've surely experienced love from or for family or pets or God. Is there anything for which we should be more grateful? And of course, there are additional experiences we undergo. How about tasting something unbelievably delicious or feeling the sun on our faces after a long stretch of dreary winter? How about learning something we didn't know, either in class or on our own, out in the world? Or taking part in a sporting event and experiencing the exhilaration of our body's skill and coordination. How about enjoying the beauties of nature? How about traveling to somewhere new and being surprised by what it has to offer? My husband and I experienced the gift of an unexpected travel experience a few years ago when we went to Ireland. My friend and coworker, Professor Calney, who's sitting up there, had traveled to Ireland the previous year and had visited the the Aran Islands. And the Aran Islands are very sparsely populated and very picturesque. She suggested that we should stop by the island of Inisheer, and we could get a horse-drawn cart tour by a gentleman named Michael Flaherty if we were able to find him. So we decided we're going to do this. And she also told us that there was a woman who had grown up in the Green Bay area who is now living on the island of Inisheer, running a tea shop, one of maybe 3 establishments on the whole island. So we went. By the way, we stopped at the Packer Pro Shop before we left and picked up a T-shirt for this woman. Got to the island of Inisheer, found this Michael Flaherty character, asked him if he could give us a tour. We told him we'd heard his name in the United States, and this is just some old farmer guy, and he was just puffed with pride as though he had Kardashian fame, you know, in the States. And so he gave us a wonderful tour of the island. He drove us past his house. He showed us his extra horse named Patrick, and he dropped us at the tea shop. We went into the tea shop. We presented our package to the woman there, who said in her half-American, half-Irish accent, "That's not from the Packer Pro Shop, is it?" And it was, and she opened her package. She saw her T-shirt. She brought us back to the back of the tea shop, which was also her home, gave us some jams that she had made as an expression of her gratitude, gave us hugs, and we left. She and Michael Flaherty were absolute strangers and absolute gifts. Passion, another aspect of life I feel gains additional importance under the umbrella of gratitude. Remember when I said that I wanted to be a horse when I grew up? Well, I meant it. But of course, biology doesn't work that way. And so as a child, the closest I could come was occasional rides on old and usually gassy old horses whose only goal was to get back to the barn as soon as possible. So my passion never faded, though, and about 3 years ago, I began taking horseback riding lessons. Cantering around a field, or arena, flying over jumps on the back of these elegant animals, feeling its unbridled, no pun intended, enthusiasm. What could be better? Absolutely nothing. Maybe you remember, if you heard it, in his last lecture this past December, Dr. Brad Ellis talked about yoga and how for him it is a coming together of mind, body, and spirit, and a meditative sort of freedom or release from the distractions of the everyday world. Well, I don't like yoga. I'm just not that peaceful of a person. But I certainly know what Dr. Ellis meant, and I find that experience when I'm writing. Joseph Campbell told us to follow our bliss, and if our circumstances are such that we've found our bliss, our passion, and are able to follow it, perhaps we owe some thanks. It seems to me passion is so valuable because it's so rare. As a result, when we find it, we often feel it has the stamp of the sublime about it, a transcendence, a purity, a spirituality whose source came from something outside of and far greater than ourselves. Remember this, according to Dr. Robert Emmons, our guru of gratitude, is the second component of gratitude. About a year and a half ago, our family suffered, I have to pick up the pace here, our family suffered a significant trauma. We learned that one of our sons is an alcoholic, with all the difficulties that alcoholism brings. When our son called us with a confession of alcoholism, we were flabbergasted and devastated. The only thing we could think to do was reach out to our friends. That evening, our friends arrived to talk us through our next steps and to offer their love and support. I found it fascinating that such seemingly contradictory feelings, utter devastation and extreme gratitude, could coexist simultaneously. But they can, and they did that night. Now, this seems like a good time to reintroduce Dr. Robert Emmons. He says, crisis can make us more grateful, but research says gratitude also helps us cope with crisis. Consciously cultivating an attitude of gratitude builds up sort of a psychological immune system that can cushion us when we fall. There is scientific evidence that grateful people are more resilient to stress, whether minor everyday hassles or major personal upheavals. He continues, the contrast between suffering and redemption serves as the basis of one of my tips for practicing gratitude. Remember the bad. It works this way. Think of the worst times in your life, your sorrows, your losses, your sadness, and then remember that here you are, able to remember them, that you made it through the worst times of your life. You got through the trauma. You got through the trial. You endured the temptation. You survived the bad relationship. You're making your way out of the dark. Remember the bad things, then look to see where you are now. To me, this is really good advice, and when our family was going through the worst of my son's alcoholism, I was following it without even knowing it, and it worked. Here's what was happening. My son lived in Madison, and we lived in De Pere. Every time there was a change in my son's situation, moving, rehab, family trips to rehab, we had to make the drive from De Pere to Madison. One of our earliest trips to Madison, I noticed a field just to the right of the highway with some picturesque round hay bales. The next time we drove to Madison a week or so later, I looked for the field again, and as we drove past it, found myself comparing my current state of mind with one from the previous week. I realized I had survived the previous difficulties. I knew there were more coming, but each time I passed the round bales, I felt a little stronger. When I look around me now, I realize I'm not in the same dark, scary place I was a year and a half ago when I learned about my son's situation. I've moved forward, and it's important for me here to differentiate between a thank God I'm not there anymore attitude and a look how far I've come attitude. The first is a sort of negative affirmation, sucks to be you. The second is a positive acknowledgement of the progress I've made, and through rehab, AA meetings, and lots of support, our son is doing well now too. But our friends' support and presence hasn't lessened or changed. My cup runneth over. So what lesson might someone take from a lecture on gratitude? Simply this. If we are beneficiaries, we can also be benefactors. If we want to ensure a climate of gratitude around us, we can provide gifts to others. If we are grateful for family, we can be family. That may mean different things to different people, but a good place to start is by loving unconditionally. If we are grateful for friends, and you're probably sitting next to one right now, we can be friends to others, supporting them and affirming them. If we are grateful for kindness, and I'm sure we've each been exposed to several acts of kindness, even today, we can practice it in our everyday lives at every turn. If kind gestures don't affirm the goodness in the world, then what are we looking for? If we are grateful for the experiences we have had, friendships, travel, love, perhaps we can enable others to have meaningful experiences too. If we are lucky enough to enjoy good physical and mental health, and the fact that we're here right now affirms that we are, we can support these things in others and help provide resources to those who aren't so lucky. And if we have found our life's passion, we can simply give thanks to God or the universe or whatever forces you believe aligned to provide us with such fortune. I started out with several quotes about gratitude from some pretty important figures, so I'd like to conclude with one more observation about gratitude. Here's something from A.A. Milne, author of the Winnie the Pooh books. He speaks about one of my favorite characters, Piglet. Piglet noticed that even though he had a very small heart, it could hold a rather large amount of gratitude. We are all so much larger than Piglet. Just imagine how much gratitude we can contain. So I'd like to express my gratitude to you right now for listening to me. Thank you so much.
most importantly, that photo with the tights, that got emailed to me at one point, and I can be bought. So, I think I still have it. Anyway, as you know, time permitting, there's some hospitality available. We hope you'll linger and enjoy a refreshment and conversation with one another. And will you join me again in thanking Laura Neary?